Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the post-budget press conference of the People's National Party. Welcome to members of the media, those who are present here with us in person and those who are online, and to also other persons who are watching online. Today is a good day indeed. The Jamaican people have been suffering for a prolonged period of time, and there are a set of proposals that have been put forward to lessen the burden on the people of this country. And whereas some are opposed to those proposals because they did not conceptualize them, we have a competent team here today that will go through the proposals, cost them, and show you how they will be funded so we can ease the burden on the Jamaican people. First up will be the leader of the party and the next Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mark Golding. Please make him welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. Greetings to everybody who is here, all members of the media, those who are watching online. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you today. So, in the just concluded budget debate, the opposition, People's National Party, through our spokesperson for finance, Julian Robinson, and myself, put forward our vision for the first term of office of the next PNP government. We took the opportunity to lay out some of our proposals as to how to make Jamaica a better place for all, to encourage economic growth, moving from the stagnation, which has been a feature of this government's management of the economy, moving to higher levels of growth that can create more wealth for our people, can create more fiscal space for social investments and for infrastructure investments and so on. In the closing of the budget debate, the Minister of Finance attempted some political gimmickry to portray the proposals that we've made as being somehow not lacking credibility or being irresponsible and so on. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have gone through our proposals with care and attention and diligence. We've used the available data from the sources that are publicly known, the budget books and the fiscal policy paper and other instruments that have been tabled with the budget and other available information to analyze the costing of our proposals and how we would be able to pay for them. The ministers tried to make out that what we were proposing in our presentations was an implied budget. That is not what we were doing, and we never said that we were doing that. We were putting forward our policy commitments for the first term, and the term of office is up to 5 years while we are in government. Clearly, the phasing of our proposals will take into account the fiscal rules, the priorities that we have, and the situations that unfold and affect the economy going forward. I reiterate that we are very committed to fiscally prudent management of the economy. Indeed, the fiscal rules that have guided the debt reduction over the last over 10 years are a result of the work that we did when we were last in government and were legislated by us during that time. And those rules have guided the entire process of budgeting over the period since, and the surpluses that needed to be driven so that we could bring down the national debt to where it is now at a roughly 69% of GDP. But everyone, I think, accepts that having managed to grapple with the debt monster and tame it and bring it under control, we need to now pivot. We need to now move forward in a new way so that we can start to take the economy in a direction that can deliver for the Jamaican people and provide solutions to the deep problems that we face. And that is what our program is designed to do. So the question is, how is it to be funded? As you will see in the course of this press conference, we have come up with a series of ideas, some of which would be paid for out of the budget in each year going forward, some of which would be paid for by the agencies which have the responsibility for those particular items. And the totality of the budget cost of our proposals based on our estimates is $23 billion annually, and that would be assuming that everything was rolled out from day one, and that does not include the 11.4 billion which the law has as ending, the extraction of 11.4 billion from NHT, which the law has ending at the end of this coming fiscal year. So the year ending March 2026 is by law currently the last year that these extraction of resources, annual extraction of resources from NHT is allowed and authorized. So we have assumed that that will not be extended, and in any event, we do not intend to extend it. The government hasn't said what their position on that is, but the society as a whole, I believe, is not in favor of any further extraction of resources from the NHT to fund the budget. So we will be putting an end to that. So how will we pay for the $23 billion of expenditure that our programs aggregate to, and stopping the annual extraction of 11.4 billion from the NHT? First of all, as I've said, we have to comply with the fiscal rules, and the phasing and timing of the implementation of our proposals will be subject to compliance with those things. But it's very important to understand, first of all, that in this year's budget, which is roughly $1.27 trillion, there is $360 billion of what is described as discretionary expenditure. That is expenditure that is decided on by the political directorate based on their priorities, and is separate from interest payments, which are always have to be provided for in the budget by the Constitution, and also salaries of public sector workers. So that $360 billion represents the issues that this government has over time decided are important for the nation. Now, nobody would expect an incoming government of the PNP, having been voted in on a mandate to deliver the change that we are bringing to the society, to just follow the priorities of the government that would have been voted out to give us, to put us into office. So clearly, that $360 billion will be reconfigured, and we will go through it very carefully, line by line, to decide what programs we will keep, what programs we will scale down, what programs we might discontinue altogether, what programs we might defer, so as to create room for the $23 billion that we want to roll out of that $360 billion. Secondly, it is important to note that, as this document here shows, which is the Government of Jamaica's fiscal policy paper, which is tabled nowadays with each budget, that was part of the transformational fiscal regime that we implemented when we were in office last, which requires this to be done. It has projections in it, and those projections show what the government is anticipating: the revenues, expenditures, debt, inflation, all of the important parameters that affect the economy and affect the public financing, how those will be projected for the next 4 years going forward. In this document, they are projecting increasing revenues by about $240 billion over the next 4 years, just by virtue of nominal inflation, prices moving over time. Jamaica now our tax system is heavily weighted towards indirect taxation, which is a taxation on the value of goods and services, either imported or sold within the economy. So that $240 area or $1 billion of additional or new expenditure that we would need to fund. And furthermore, I was looking at the projections again today, and if you look at the expenditure projections from 25-26, which is the coming fiscal year, and going forward, and you were to inflate the expenditure projections for the coming year by the projected rate of inflation, which is 5%, and you take and you inflate that other than interest, which is not subject to inflation, and you just use the projected interest numbers, you will see that there's $36 billion of additional expenditure for the following fiscal year over and above the increases that of 5% on what is being projected for this year, which is more than the coverage that we need to fund our 22 billion. So this whole nonsense, and I can only call it nonsense, that our proposals are not credible, that our proposals cannot be financed, this idea of a FinSAC, which is just a bogeyman being raised by the Minister of Finance for political purposes, that is all nonsense, not Nogoso. Our plans are credible, and we will ensure that the fiscal rules are complied with. So I'm going to now go through the specific measures that we have outlined in our budget presentation and how we have costed them. I will take some of those. I will ask Damian Crawford, our Shadow Minister for Education, to speak to those that are specific to his portfolio. Julian will speak to some as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. We will begin with the first, which is the 1 meal per student per day. And I will ask Damian to speak to that.
Thank you very much, Leader. I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this press conference, and a special good morning to those who are listening and the journalists who are present and online. We, as a People's National Party, has proposed verbatim that we would have 1 meal per needy child in school. It is confusing to us that the Minister of Finance, the past Minister of Education, would posit that that number of needy children would be 400,000, when currently they propose to feed 167,000 children. So the Minister of Education, former Minister of Education, have already stated that she believes that over 200,000 needy children would not be fed under their current policies. However, we feel that the cost per meal should not be $280 per child, as is currently being provided, but instead $400 per child. This $280 have long been stated by principals and other practitioners within education to be insufficient to feed the children. Many have caused for ask for another $100 from the children, and some have reduced the number of days that they have been able to feed the children. So we propose a $400 per meal for primary and secondary school children. The number of days in the school year, which we all know and agree is 190 days in the year. Percentage of children needing meals was estimated at 56% of children needing meals. This is based on the recent survey that suggested that severe or moderate food insecurity was 55.6%. So we carried that 56% of our people are within that space. The total number of children we have in school is 440,000. Therefore, the number of children in need of meals will be 246,400. The total cost of the proposal, therefore, multiplying 246,400 by 190 days for $400 is $18.7 billion. However, the book that everyone seems to be most concerned about has a current school feeding budget of $8.98 billion. So the additional would be approximately $9.9 billion. So $9.7 billion. So therefore, the additional that we will need to find to adequately feed the 56% of children that research has shown is likely to have difficulties in eating meals are going to be $9 billion. And again, we ask for the Jamaicans to recognize that the minister in her proposal, in her suggestion, suggests that 400,000 children are in need, of which they have made a budget to feed only 170,000, less than 170,000, leaving the other 230,000 to be sacrificed by the Jamaica Labour Party. The other proposal that we put forward is an estimate of cost for tertiary education. It is the policy objective of the People's National Party to have 1 degree per household or its equivalent. It is important that we highlight a level 4 vocation is equivalent to a degree. Within that, to facilitate that policy objective, we like to do a first in the family scholarship, meaning that the first person within a household that matriculates to the university will receive a scholarship. Ridiculously, and is a ludicrous a word, but yeah. Yes, quite ludicrous. The minister seemed to assume that all children in a particular age cohort will matriculate to the university, while it was her mismanagement of education that has caused for only 18% to matriculate. So while we would have hoped that all would be able to matriculate, her lack of activity and change within the ministry has caused for only 18% of our children to currently matriculate to the university. This will be something that we will target moving forward as well. However, we have to use our current circumstances for our current budget. Therefore, of the 36,000 children within the age cohort, only 18% are currently matriculating. We also have organized to assume what is the percentage of children are matriculating that will be the first in the family. Again, another feature of our society is that the vast majority of those performing at the secondary level matriculating to university are of the upper echelons of society and from families that already have a degree within that family. And so we assume 1 in every 4 person matriculating to the university, or 25%, will be first in the family. Again, another reality that we will target as the People's National Party, and that we have been targeting. Indeed, whenever there is a proposal, a plan for the movement of these people, the JLP has always sought to suggest that these are bad policy plans. They said the same about Michael Manley. They said the same about PJ Patterson led government. Indeed, I wonder how can it be posited that a government of PJ Patterson that moved tertiary access from 6% to 19% could be perceived to be a bad government of any sort in any country. Notwithstanding, our average annual cost per student is $600,000. We are very wary of a Minister of Finance that is refusing to do research, because if you call the universities, MICO, for example, less than 400,000, the teachers' colleges, UTech, less than 600,000, and many UWI degrees is less than 600,000. Where would she find that the average cost of education is 900,000 is beyond me. And it is likely, therefore, that the same 18% might be the targets we achieve, might be 18% of those targets. Can you just, so when we do that total, the number of students in the 4 years of university at any given time for the first in the family would be approximately 6,480 students in years 1, 2, 3, 4 combined. The total annual cost of all first-generation students across the year cohorts, therefore, is approximately $3.9 billion, and not $31 billion has been posited by the minister in her false accusations. The estimate for the RIDE program, again, this is a program that we have posited. The Prime Minister have chosen to seek a response. A very different program, which we'll expound upon in future conversations, but not just the provision in 2 or 3 parishes and whoever get the bus, but instead a targeted approach of 20,000 students with demonstrating need. Initially, we'll target those who are most in need and scale up as the fiscal space allow to those who may be currently less in need, but still would desire to have that assistance. So the current program that the government have is targeting 7,500 students. No wonder we have persisted to have an absenteeism ratio of approximately 24% in Jamaica. Chronic absenteeism is stated to be 10%. So Jamaica in its entirety is operating under chronic absenteeism. To help to fix that, we will target transportation, especially because we embrace school choice within this society. The subsidy is up to $2,500 per week, depending on the cost of travel, and each student gets the benefit of up to this amount. 38 weeks for school per year. The initial annual cost, therefore, will be $1.9 billion. Of course, we would subtract from that what they currently have allocated for the 7,500, as they will be incorporated in this 20,000 persons. Thank you very much. And I think that we have satisfactorily stated that education is the hallmark of the People's National Party.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Damien. So there you have it. We've costed our meal program, 1 meal per student per day. The RIDE program providing a subsidy up to $2,500 per week for 20,000 students, and the First in Family scholarships which would reach over 6,000 students, and we've costed all of that out with the data that we have. I now move to agriculture. We have a proposal to establish an agricultural development fund, and we have looked at the average annual food import taxes levied, and we've applied a percentage to that, and we've arrived at a 2.5 billion annual amount, which is really from the existing tax base that we would specifically earmark for this agricultural development fund to give our farmers the support they need to be productive, to move forward. And that is within the envelope that we are able to fund, as I've said. I should mention that yesterday in Parliament, the government brought a bill to amend the GCT Act to remove GCT from food imports of fresh produce, vegetables, and meats. And it was the intervention of the opposition that caused the government to suspend debate on that bill. And that, is important to note, because when that GCT is removed from those imports, any of those goods that compete with local domestic farmers are going to be have an advantage which they don't currently have now, and make life even harder for our farmers to survive. Next slide, please. Small businesses. I'm going to ask
Sure.
Julian to speak to this.
Thank you very much. We proposed a waiver of corporate income tax for new MSMEs that are establishing for the first 3 years. And we propose that we have made an allocation of $1 billion for this. If we got data from the Companies Office of Jamaica to look at the number of MSMEs, a number of companies that are established each year, and that is in the region of about 5,000 new companies per year on average over the last 3 years. Now, not every single company is going to pay taxes initially in their first year or necessarily make a profit. But we made an assumption that, let's say, 60% of them would actually make a profit. Based on that, we have also done a calculation of what that profit would look like. And so the loss or the impact on the Treasury for offering that tax waiver for 1 year is $1 billion. Nowhere near the $11 billion that the minister has announced. And I want to remind the country why we're doing this. Jamaica has a very high level of informality in our business sector, mainly because businesses stay outside the formal system to avoid paying tax. We want them in the formal system because even though you're not paying corporate income tax, when you're in the formal system, you'll be contributing to GCT, you're employing people, your payroll tax. There are a number of other benefits to companies coming into that formal system. And we believe this incentive is important to encourage businesses, MSMEs, to come into the formal system. So based on our calculation, looking at the history of the compliance and also taking into account that businesses get a $375,000 income tax credit every single year. So if, for example, let me use a simple example. Let's say your profits are $5 million, right? Or 25%. No, your profits are $500,000. You pay 25% of that. That's $125,000. So you will already have a credit from the corporate income tax. So the figures presented by the minister are nowhere near accurate in terms of what that revenue give up would be.
Before we move to the next slide, Jules, can I just make one point on this? On this issue, I just want to make one point. The minister clearly had a pro-box moment on this issue, because when she's projecting that the measure to give a 3-year tax holiday for newly formed MSMEs would cost over $11 billion per year. What that suggests is that the newly formed SMEs are making profits of over $40 billion a year. Now that's more than the profits of the entire financial sector. Come on, Minister, stop misleading the public. Yeah.
I want to go next to a sector that has allowed Jamaica to punch above its weight. We have said we're going to put aside $1 billion for a cultural and creative industry fund. We know that there's a fund for filmmakers, but there are so many other subsectors that are not accounted for. There are people who sing, there are people who dance, there are painters, there are musicians, there are artists, there are the full gamut. We have said we're going to provide this fund to enable them to grow their businesses. Many of them are in export-led businesses. They're providing a service, but they are creative, but they don't necessarily have the financial backing to expand the business in the way that we believe is important to facilitate export-led growth. So we are allocating $1 billion, and we're going to work with using the DBJ as the main entity to disburse the funds, to facilitate the creation of business plans. We provide the technical assistance as well, so that these individuals can grow. That's a commitment of our party. We have seen where our cultural icons have put Jamaica on the map, whether it is in sport, it's in music, and we are committed to supporting that sector even further. Now, the asset tax, again, I think this was a pro-box moment of the minister, but I want to explain the thinking behind the phasing out of the asset tax. I said three things in my budget presentation. First, that we would make access to government deposits competitive versus a system now where the two big banks get the majority of it. The second thing I said, I would phase out the asset tax over a 5-year period. Now, if you phase something out over a 5-year period, it means that each year you're taking 1/5 of that take each year. So the minister presented $8 billion yesterday that we would be giving back. In fact, the opposition leader stood on a point of order. We never said that. We said over 5 years, and we were deliberate. We knew that we could not absorb the entire amount of the asset tax in 1 year. And what we have said, by phasing it out, it will make banks more competitive, and it will reduce the cost of banking services and fees to the customer. The government has done nothing about this in 9 years. It has done nothing about this. And we believe this is important for competitiveness in the banking and financial services industry, and also for individuals who go to ATMs, use their bank cards, and have to deal with the level of fees that they absorb. So this figure of $8 billion is a mystery to me. I can say it is only consistent with the pro-box moment, where she believes that saving $2,000 a month for 3 years can make a deposit. It is fantasy, and it's actually ludicrous that a minister of finance could stand up in parliament and make such false and deliberately inaccurate and misleading statement. Yeah. She has said nothing about what the government plans to do to make the banking sector more competitive. In fact, when Fitz-Jackson brought the bill, we knew which side they stood on. They voted it down. We are committed to bringing back that bill and passing it, because you cannot have a sector in the country where, when every other sector is not doing well, only one sector is, which is banking and financial services. We have to make it more competitive and consistent with the other sectors and aligned with the other sectors.
Right. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Julian. We move now to energy. The government has very late in the day finally acceded to something that we have been calling for a long time, which is to put some funding behind allowing families that currently are not lawful customers of the grid, of JPS, but want to become lawful so that they can have proof of address, so they're no longer at risk of being prosecuted, so that the fire risks inherent in having houses not properly wired, all of that can be dealt with. They've allocated $1 billion in the budget for that. We have said we think that's insufficient, because that can only reach 20,000 households, and our estimation is that there are actually around 3,000 households that are not currently customers of JPS. We would start by adding another $1 billion to that exercise, and as fiscal space opens up, we will also look to ramp that up further. Next slide, please. So, if you add up all of the measures that we have proposed, which are charges on the budget, with all the slides we went through, the total for that is $22.6 billion. And if you round that up for conservative purposes, that's $23 billion. It's the aggregate cost of the budget of the measures that we have outlined. And that is out of a budget currently of $1.27 trillion. And therefore, a percentage of only 1.8% of the total budget to do with all these things that we think are important to help Jamaican people move forward, to help our children get a better education, to allow farmers to progress, to allow businesses to be formed and to get going, to help to drive the economy, better energy policy, etc., etc. But there are some other things in our proposals which are important and that we will speak to. As I've said, there's 360 billion of discretionary expenditure in the coming year's budget. The percentage reallocation of discretionary expenditure to fund the proposals that we have put forward is just 6.4%. And as I've said, even if you look at their projections, there's 36 billion of funding in expenditure when if you gross up this coming year's expenditure other than the interest for inflation, applying the 5% projection, what you get is they're projecting additional expenditure over that of 36 billion, and we're talking about 23 billion plus the NHT, 34 billion. So there we go. And of course, the $11.4 billion is already in the budget for the current year and wouldn't have to be funded for the current year, the removal of it. But thereafter, it will have to be funded. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I've said earlier, we will deal with the NHT revenue that we'll be giving up by giving up the 11.4 billion out of the incremental growth of revenues that is projected in the fiscal policy paper itself, $240 billion of additional revenue with no new tax measures over the next 4 years. Thank you. Next slide. We have some other proposals that we want to speak to. So as Julian, in his presentation, said that we want to have a special deal for our senior citizens when it comes to their water rate. We want to provide them with a flat rate. How do we do that? Simply put, we will look at their past consumption, we will average the last 3 years, and as long as it appears normal and that there were no leaks and so on, we will work out what their average consumption has been. We'll apply the normal rate to that and then give them a discount, and that will be their flat rate. And we will monitor that as we go along to make sure it achieves our policy objective. Next item is the matching grant to businesses for training. That will be funded out of the HEART NSTA, which is a strong body that gets on every month, it gets flows coming in from employers, contributing to it. So it has solid resources and it can afford to do this matching program out of its resources without being a charge on the budget. The employment tax credit. This is an important thing because this is an incentive for employers to bring persons who are on contract work, informal forms of employment, which is an abusive measure as used by some employers, not all. We want to encourage them to bring those workers into formal employment so the workers get their full range of benefits that were hard-won in the past, and many of those benefits were created for them by the People's National Party, and we want them to enjoy those benefits. So the employment tax credit, we're proposing to move that from 30%, which is where it was when we introduced it back in the last PNP government, to 40%. We anticipate that to be a revenue positive measure, not a cost to the budget. Next slide, please, and I'll explain why. First of all, it will boost tax compliance by companies, which has been the experience so far with the ETC, the employment tax credit. And by formalizing employment, it will also bring more employee-related revenue to the government. When the ETC was introduced 10 years ago, a significant growth in corporate taxes were experienced as a result of that tax incentive. It's one of the things that from time to time one has to point out, that actually a properly designed tax incentive can in fact increase revenue by changing behavior in ways that generate more revenue. And we anticipate that that will be the case with this ETC measure. And we want to give the employers this incentive because we want to regularize employment across Jamaica. So we don't have so many workers in Jamaica not getting the benefits that are intended for them, leave with pay, etc., etc. And the other one, of course, is the deposit fund for young people up to 35 years old who want to buy a house but can't afford a deposit. The $1 billion that's allocated for that, so they can get grants towards their deposits of up to $500,000. And that will be funded out of the NHT itself. That will not be a charge on the budget. And of course, by discontinuing the extraction of resources from the NHT of 11.4 billion a year, the NHT will have significantly additional resources to do all the various things that we have in mind for the NHT, many of which I pointed out in my budget presentation. That's it, I think.
I want to say something on DBJ.
Yes, and then I have some closing remarks.
The minister announced yesterday that the DBJ would review and reform the way it provides loans to the MSME sector. Now, we made a commitment that we would back end all of the fees that MSMEs have been required to pay upfront. For example, if you're taking out a $10 million loan, MSMEs were required to pay $500,000 upfront. That was an inhibitor to persons accessing financing. Now, 9 years into the tenure of this government, just a simple adjustment. And what does that say? Have they been listening to the business sector for 9 years? The MSME sector has been calling for this adjustment. It costs the government nothing. You know how many times we sit at Standing Finance and we see monies that have been sent to the DBJ coming back unused because people can't access it because of the onerous conditions. So belatedly, after pressure from our commitment and from the sector, 9 years later, this government has decided to make this adjustment. Is 9 years too late? Can you imagine how many businesses could have accessed funding to grow, to pay more taxes, to build more products and services and make the economy improve? And you wait 9 years to do this? Them not ready. Them just not ready.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Well said. So 23 billion of tax measures and the elimination of the extraction of resources from the NHT to fund the budget, totaling 23 billion plus 11.4, 34 billion. Incidentally, if that could ruin the economy, let's look at the 1.5 that they introduced in 2016, which cost $32 billion and which they've held up as a great achievement. They didn't misrepresent it when they presented it to the country in that election, because they said it wouldn't cost anything. It ended up costing 32 billion, which they had to impose taxes to pay for that 1.5. So when you look at our measures, it's comparable in amount. It will not have any ruinous effect. To the contrary, it's going to push the country towards growth. It's going to push the country towards social cohesion, a better Jamaica, and it will pay for itself. We're being very conservative in looking at this because we haven't assumed any growth in excess of what's projected. The 1%, the measly 1% per annum growth that they are projecting for the next 4 years in their fiscal policy paper. So the message is simple. The government that we have is one of gimmicks. It's one of misrepresentations. It's one of alarmists. Instead of taking the time to focus on what they could do for the people and how to make the budget work for the people, they again wanted to score headlines at the expense of the people. The PNP is about balancing budgets, yes, and balancing lives too. Unlike the current administration, we delivered plans with people at the center, not gimmicks, and we haven't regurgitated empty promises of the past. They are a government that has made promises which they haven't kept. No fixed term elections, no grand referendum on issues to do with all sorts of issues that they had promised, etc., etc. Our priorities are the people's priorities: a solid education, decent health care, a nutritious meal for our children, and an affordable way for them to get to school. A piece of the rock to own and make your castle. A good paying job where you're treated with dignity, and a livable wage to ensure that families can get by. That's who our presentation in the budget was created for, while the government's was a sideshow to create division and spread misinformation. We will continue to put the people first and champion the change that Jamaica is crying out for. Time come. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks much, gentlemen. Members of the media, if you do have a question or questions, please indicate, identify yourself, your media house, and go ahead with the question.
Yeah, I'll go first. Right. Yeah, man, good afternoon. Yeah, man, it's Dwayne Anderson
Dwayne
from
Anderson,
PVJ.
yes.
Yeah, Dayton. I have one question for, should I go ahead and ask both questions? I have two. Should I go ahead and ask both and then, or just ask one?
To the same individual?
No, one for Damien and one for...
One at a time then.
All right, so let's start, Mr. Golding. Good afternoon again, Mr. Golding. I've noted that you or the party hasn't said a thing about the income tax threshold. I remember about 2 years ago or about 18 months ago, you mentioned that your party would be interested in increasing the threshold, the income tax threshold, to about $3 million. I haven't heard a lot about that. What happened to that policy plan?
Well, it's under review. At this time, there have been some increases in the threshold, and we've seen the costings of it. Some of these things, when you don't have access to all of the information that the government has with the Ministry of Finance and literally a few thousand technocrats supporting their work. We don't have access to that. So we're anticipating further increases over time, but that's not part of the presentation that we made because it's already underway and we are comfortable with that, but we'll keep it under review.
All right, thank you. Damien, you've often spoken about the benefits of a more educated population to the fight against crime and increase in quality of life for Jamaicans. Just listening to your numbers you outlined just now, about 6,000 people would benefit from this degree per household program. Is that significant enough over 3-4 years to, achieve the transformation you're looking for?
Okay, well, first of all, that 6,000 persons would be in years 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the university, not over 4 years of the budget. So that 6,000 will be benefiting in year 1. There'll be some who will graduate and then others that will come in. Now, what are the benefits of a degree? The first reality is that many of the maladies of our society doesn't exist in households with degrees. Households with degrees are less likely to have persons with illiteracy within them. Households with degrees are less likely to have persons with malnutrition within them. Houses with degree are less likely to have persons participating in criminal activity, especially murder within them. Houses with degrees are less likely to have insufficient housing and in access to healthcare because of cost. And so therefore, if within our first 5 years, we can get graduating almost, that will be 10, 12,000 graduates, and in line, another 15,000 persons coming forward, it would have been a massive achievement in our first 5 years. Now, if you should understand that a country is a going concern, my life is not the limit of our country, then it means that within 20 years, what change would that have been? And had we started this in 2000, then we would have already achieved it. So is it sufficient to immediately transform the society? No, it is sufficient to immediately transform 6,000 households, which will have about 4 persons per household. And therefore, we believe that this is a necessary thing that no government with the interest of the people could criticize. And that is something we are going to immediately implement as soon as we get power. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News. Just 2 questions I believe it was Damien who brought up the matter of the school feeding program. So I suppose I'll be putting that to you. Has the costing for that, I noticed you used the unit cost for food. You said $480 to feed an individual. Does that factor in the logistics and administrative costs as well? And further, why not simply just expand the PATH program school feeding rather than create an entirely new initiative to save the potential administrative and other costs attached?
All right. We haven't seen how it is our new system. However, current $180 per meal considered all costs including transportation. I don't believe each school is growing in flour or rice. So by extension, it would consider all of those costs. So what we have done, first of all, is to increase the number of persons that benefit exponentially. I think a reasonable question is, why is the Ministry of Education currently not feeding the 400,000 that the Minister of Finance suggests are in need? The second reality is that we have exponentially increased the number of children that are going to benefit. And we will create all the necessary steps and programs that will make it be the most efficient and the least thievery. We know, as a matter of reminder to the nation, that the government of Jamaica had many who participated in the robbery of nutritional products, which is the school feeding program for our children. So what we have seen, first of all, is discrimination, where PATH program children are being put in a different line, having a different food and feeling as if they are inadequate as people. We'll end that with immediate effect by having a nutritious meal of the same type to all our children that are going to be available. So is it going to be an expansion of this current strategy? We'd have to review all the systems that they have in place. We may have a different strategy. What we know is that it will be better, it will be further, and it will be more inefficient and much more nutritious. I can guarantee that as well.
Efficient.
100% more efficient.
More inefficient.
Yeah,
More efficient, more effective, more nutritious, more children, and more value. Thank you very much.
Then to you, Mr. Golding, the people were now wondering, why was this costing not added into your budget presentation as part of that budget exercise? Because as understood, it is a budget debate presentation. So why is this costing now coming to the people rather than during the actual budget debates?
Late but to reach.
The presentation I made was quite comprehensive. It covered a lot of different things. There were other areas that I had wanted to touch on, which I didn't want to make it too long. The Prime Minister spoke for nearly 5 hours, I think. I didn't think that was appropriate. So, you know, we didn't put in costings because we didn't feel that that was necessary in the presentation itself. We weren't producing a budget. This is what I think is very important. The minister said it was an implied budget we were presenting. That's not the case. We are presenting our policy priorities for our first term in office. We know how to, we have costed them, as we've explained today, how they break down. 23 billion is our estimate for all of the things that we have put forward as a charge to the budget. Some of the other things will be paid for by the public bodies which relate to those things. And then there's the NHT, which we're going to stop the extraction of resources from. The government has not said the cost of the capital allowances, which was one of the revenue measures that the minister announced in her budget presentation. She has said that land and buildings and equipment for companies, they're going to get an accelerated capital allowance. There was no costing attached to that in her numbers. That is very irresponsible. We don't know what that's going to cost. Nobody has said a word about it. I'd love Nationwide to raise that, you know, issue an article, and you can use what I just said in it, so that your many clientele who would listen to you would be happy to hear that, I'm sure. Not so many, but you know, no doubt loyal to you. So yes, that's the answer. We've decided to present it separately as part of in this press conference, only because of the malign and inaccurate comments made by the minister yesterday in her closing of the presentation. We are in opposition, and we put forward ideas and proposals, and we cost them with the benefit of the information available to us, which of course is significantly more limited than what's available. We put in place, we at least have revenue estimates, which we never used to have, a fiscal policy paper with projections, which the minister has to sign off on. So she can't tell me that she never meant what she said in here. She signed it. So that is what we have been using in order to deliver the costing of our proposals.
Liver.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, Shaban asked one of my questions, so I'll only ask one. You said yesterday in Parliament that what you presented, the proposals that you presented, are programs that are going to be implemented over the life of the People's National Party government.
Yeah.
Can you tell the people of Jamaica what programs you intend to implement in year 1, year 2 going forward? Just kind of give us an idea of what are you, one second, what are you going to prioritize year 1?
Yeah.
And
Yes, so based on the budget as presented by the government, which is going to be the budget that we inherit when we form government, you know, that budget is already going to be in effect because it will be passed on Friday in the Senate, and the next fiscal year starts next week, Tuesday. So it will be the budget that we have to work within initially. But when we enter and we are rolling out our programs, we will, based on the numbers that we have seen, we anticipate being able to implement all of them initially. If, for example, there is a hurricane or something has happened that has thrown out the projections, we will have to make adjustments accordingly. But based on what's in the fiscal policy paper, we anticipate being able to do it. If we recognize at that time that we can't do all 23 plus the 11.4 in the first year of our tenure, then the things that we would be prioritizing are the things that we feel would have the biggest impact on economic growth. Reason being because economic growth is going to generate more fiscal space to pay for everything else. So things like helping the farmers, that would be critical. Things like the First in Family program, that would be important too, because we want more students to be encouraged. Our Student Loan Bureau changes, for example, the MSME policy. By the way, the MSME policy is not a fiscal cost, because these are businesses that don't currently exist. They're not paying any tax now. By giving them an exemption for 3 years, we're not taking it's not going to be losing any current revenue. I think that's been overlooked by people. Not to mention the pro-box moment and the madness of saying it's $11 billion a year.
Okay. So to Mr. Golding, just to follow up on that question asked, then you pointed out that obviously your priorities will not be the same as the government currently in power, and certainly there's things that you don't have access to in terms of information, but clearly you should, as you see in opposition, see areas where the government has put their priorities that you feel can be deprioritized to implement your programs. What would be those areas?
I don't want to comment on that now, because we have to look at every line item when we come into office carefully. And there are some things that we may defer. There's some things that we may accelerate. There's some things that we may discontinue. And I don't want to attempt to foreshadow that yet, but I'm confident that we can find the 6.4% of the 360 billion to pay for what we have come up with. And as I've said, based on the fiscal policy paper, that doesn't even seem like it's going to be necessary anyway.
Finally, from me, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister hammered home this matter of what FinSAC did in terms of the impact on the country's debt and your potential role in that debacle in the 1990s. Do you accept that narrative as put forward? And do you feel that FinSAC, as it played out in the 1990s, was damaging to the Jamaican economy?
What has been a real waste of expenditure is over $100 million that the government spent on a commission of inquiry, which has not delivered a report. That's a scandal. Over $100 million spent on getting the facts as to what took place, and they have not published a report. FinSAC ensured that in a crisis in the financial sector, depositors didn't lose any money. Pensioners didn't lose any money. Persons who had insurance didn't lose any money. That was the purpose of FinSAC. And yes, it cost the country quite a lot of money, and we took time to work our way out of that. We're now at 68% debt to GDP ratio. That era is long gone. I had no role in FinSAC whatsoever. I was in the private sector there. I was an attorney at law, and I was involved in business as well. So, you know, that was an environment we all had to navigate who were in the sector at that time. And we did it skillfully enough that we never had to ask FinSAC for any support. Thank you.
Yeah, one final question.
Dwayne, just before you go, I'm wondering if Nationwide would ask the Prime Minister, how is it that he can explain how other people got riches, but he's unable to explain his own riches according to the Integrity Commission? Dwayne?
Yeah, thanks, Dayton. One final question, Mr. Golding, and I hope you crave indulgence, because it's not quite related to the budget, but it could be related to the budget depending on how we tread in relations to our diplomatic relationship with the United States. As you know, Mr. Rubio is in Jamaica. What particular area you want the Prime Minister and indeed regional leaders to discuss with Mr. Rubio today and into tomorrow?
I think that in dealing with these matters, it's good to put forward a united position as CARICOM. You know, I think the nations of CARICOM together have significant voting power in international and regional bodies. So I'm in favor of CARICOM having a joint position rather than Jamaica or any other member of CARICOM going alone. Issues to do with immigration, issues to do with energy policy, et cetera, et cetera. And there's only one government at a time in power, you know, and right now the Jamaica Labour Party are in power. I think they're meeting with Mr. Rubio today, the Prime Minister, and we'll see what comes out of that. But my preference on these matters is that there's a united CARICOM position so that the US knows what the region feels about these things and we can work out solutions that are win-win. We want to have win-win solutions. Jamaica has many, many people living in the United States. We're reliant on remittances from there and other countries, etc. Travel advisories can be damaging to our tourism industry. So we have to be respectful and sensible and strategic in how we approach these matters. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to close by saying that after 9 years in office and only 18% of our students passing 5 subjects to include math and English, we now hear the government talking about choosing Jamaica. After 9 years in office and 55% of the population unable to feed themselves properly, they're now speaking about choosing Jamaica. After 9 years in office and 70% increase in the import bill of food items into the country, they're now speaking about choosing Jamaica. After 9 years in office and giving themselves 300% and offering impecunious returns to the minimum wage earners, they're now speaking about choosing Jamaica. Well, the people of Jamaica have decided that they're choosing change. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.